Please. The word came out so quietly that Diane Okafor almost didn't hear it. I'm not asking for money. Could I have whatever's left on your plate? You weren't going to finish it. The terrace of Birchwood Club had gone very still. Not loudly still, not the dramatic kind of silence that happens in movies when someone drops a glass. It was the particular quiet of 40 people pretending not to notice something they were absolutely noticing. The kind of quiet that costs money to maintain. Diane looked up from her half-eaten salmon. Standing beside her table was a young man. She would later guess he was 24 or 25. Though hunger had a way of aging people in ways that were hard to read. His jacket was gray-green from too many nights in the rain. His boots were held together at the toe with what looked like electrical tape. He held nothing, no sign, no cup, no extended hand. He had just walked in from Wellington Street and asked her very quietly if he could have her leftovers. The maitre d' was already moving. Sir. His voice was soft but directional, the kind of voice designed to move people toward exits without causing scenes. I'm going to have to ask you to come with me. The young man didn't argue, he just looked once more at Diane's plate. Then he started to turn. Wait, Diane said, she didn't plan it. She had been a Hargrove by marriage for 22 years, and in that time she had learned exactly how much space to take up in a room like this and exactly how little trouble to cause. She knew the rules of Birchwood Club the way she knew the rules of her own breathing. And yet, he can sit with me. The maitre blinked. His name was Gerald, and Gerald had been managing difficult situations at Birchwood for 11 years. But this particular sentence from this particular woman did not fit any category he had prepared for. Mrs. Hargrove, bring another place setting, please. She said it pleasantly, the way she might ask for more water. Then she looked at the young man. Sit down, you don't have to eat my leftovers, they'll bring you something hot. The young man didn't move right away. He stood very still like someone who had learned the hard way not to trust the moment before kindness became something else. I don't want to get you in trouble, he said. You won't? I can't pay, I didn't ask you to. He looked at her for a long moment. She met his eyes and did not look away. Whatever he was searching for, he seemed to find enough of it to pull out the chair across from her and sit down on the very edge of it, back straight, as if he might need to stand again quickly. Gerald lingered. Mrs. Hargrove, he said, quieter now. I understand your generosity, truly. But we do have a membership policy, and Gerald, Diane set her fork down. My family has been coming to this club for 31 years. My late father-in-law built the East Wing. She paused, not unkindly. Please bring my guest a bowl of soup and whatever today's special is. Gerald left. The young man watched him go. Then he looked at Diane with an expression she couldn't quite name. Not gratitude exactly. More like a person standing in the rain who has just been told the rain might eventually stop. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Diane said. You haven't tried the soup. It came out of her mouth before she could stop it, and she was surprised to find it was a joke. She almost never made jokes at Birchwood. The young man, his name was Noah, she would learn, gave a small, careful smile. The kind that looked like it had been stored away for a long time and wasn't sure it was safe to come out. The soup arrived. He picked up the spoon the way someone picks up something they are afraid will be taken from them, and then he ate. Not quickly, but steadily, with a concentration that made Diane think of the way her son used to eat after hockey practice when he was 12. That absolute physical need that overtook everything else. She did not watch him. Or rather, she watched without watching, the way you can when you've spent a lifetime learning to observe people without making them feel observed. He was thin in the specific way that comes from months of inconsistency. Not starvation, but the grinding uncertainty of not knowing when the next meal would come. His hands were clean but rough. There was a small scar along his left jawline, faded to silver, old enough to have a story she would never ask about. When the main course came, roasted chicken which Gerald had brought over personally as a kind of peace offering or perhaps a warning, Noah looked at the plate like he was calculating how long to make it last. You don't have to ration it, Diane said quietly. He looked up, caught. Sorry, he said. Habit. Don't apologize for habits that kept you alive. Something shifted in his face. He set down his fork and looked at her with a directness that surprised her. Most people who came to Birchwood looked at her the way you look at furniture.
Nice furniture.
Yes, but furniture. Why are you doing this? He asked. It was the right question, and the honest kind, the kind people only asked when they were genuinely confused rather than performing gratitude. Diane considered it seriously. I'm not entirely sure, she said. But you looked like someone who needed to be treated like a person. He was quiet for a moment. Most people here looked right through me. Yes, she said. They did. Doesn't that bother you, being part of this? He stopped, looked at his plate. Go ahead. He shook his head slightly. I shouldn't. You should, Diane said. I can take it. He met her eyes. Being part of a place that could make someone invisible while they're standing right there asking for help. The words landed without cruelty but without softness either. Just truth, sitting on the white tablecloth between them. Yes, Diane said. It bothers me. It's bothered me for a long time. She paused. I'm not sure I've done enough about it. He seemed to accept that. He went back to eating. She watched his hands again. The scar on his jaw. the careful way he held himself, dignity maintained through sheer effort, the kind that cost more energy than most people ever had to spend. There was something familiar about it, not about him specifically, about the effort, the way he was holding himself together in a room designed to make him feel he didn't belong. She had felt that once. A very long time ago, before the Hargrove name, before Birchwood, before she had learned to wear a certain kind of woman like a coat. She had nearly forgotten what that felt like. They sat in silence for a few minutes. Not uncomfortable silence, just the kind that happens between two people who have said something honest and need a moment to let it settle. Then Noah said, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "Do you come here because you like it? Or because you're supposed to?" Diane blinked. 31 years no one had asked her that. She looked around the terrace, the cream linen, the water glasses that were never less than 3/4 full, the murmur of conversations about properties and portfolios and whose children had gotten into which schools. "Both," she said honestly, "and neither." "It's complicated." "Yeah," he said, "most things are." He finished the chicken, ate half the bread before seeming to remember he was being watched and slowed down. Gerald brought dessert without being asked, a small bowl of maple creme brulee, and placed it in front of Noah with careful neutrality. Noah looked at it, then at Diane. "Tell me something," she said. "How long?" He didn't ask how long what, he just said, 8 months. "What happened?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside on Wellington Street, a streetcar passed. Diane waited. "I had a job," he said. "Good one actually. Project manager for a construction firm out in Oakville. I was good at it." A pause. "Then my mother got sick, lung cancer. I took a leave to take care of her. They said they'd hold my position." Another pause. "They didn't." Diane said nothing. "She passed in March," Noah said. "After that I couldn't." He stopped. Pressed his lips together. "I had some savings. I thought I had more time to sort things out before they ran out." "I was wrong." "No family?" Diane asked. Something moved across his face. "I have a sister. Somewhere." "Somewhere. We were separated when we were kids." He said it the way you say a fact you've said so many times it no longer has edges. "Our mother, our birth mother, she wasn't able to take care of us. I was 11. My sister was 4. His jaw tightened. "I got placed with a family in her. The system." He shook his head. "The files were sealed." Diane's hands went still in her lap. "I used to look for her," Noah said. "Every few years I'd try again. Different agencies, different databases, nothing." He looked down at the dessert spoon. "Her name was Lily. I called her that anyway. I don't know what name she has now." The terrace seemed very far away suddenly. Diane heard the sound of the street, the clink of someone's fork 3 tables over, Gerald's voice somewhere near the entrance, smooth and practiced. She heard her own heartbeat. "When was she born?" Diane asked, and her voice came out strangely careful. Noah looked up, slightly puzzled by the question. January 19th, I think. I'm not sure of the exact year. I was just a kid. But I remember her birthday because our mother used to make it this lemon cake with too much icing and..." He stopped, looked at Diane's expression. "Are you okay?" Diane set her water glass down very slowly. January 19th, the date that lived on the 4th shelf of her memory, in the place she never went voluntarily. The date written on a hospital bracelet she had kept in a shoebox for 20 years, before finally making herself throw it away. The date her daughter had been born. The daughter who had been placed for adoption 2 days later, by a 23-year-old who had nothing and no one, and who had been told by people she trusted that she was doing the right thing, the selfless thing, the only thing. The daughter she had spent 20 years telling herself was fine, was somewhere good, was better off. The daughter whose face she had constructed in her mind so many times it had worn smooth like a stone, unrecognizable now even to her. The daughter she had looked for quietly, carefully, in the years since she had found her footing and her resources and her courage, and found nothing. Sealed files, closed records, bureaucratic walls built specifically to protect children from the parents who gave them up, as if love that came late was still dangerous. She pressed one hand flat against the table. "I'm fine," she said. I'm sorry. I want to make sure I understand your sister. She was placed in the system at the same time as you, or earlier?" "Same time," Noah said. "Child services came in February. Lily was 4, small for her age. She had this." He paused and something softened in his face. "She had this birthmark, right below her left ear, shaped kind of like a comma. I used to tell her it meant she was taking a pause and then something good was coming." Diane looked at her water glass. Below her left ear, a small mark, comma-shaped. She had only seen her daughter once. For 40 minutes in a hospital room in Mississauga before she had signed the papers and the nurses had taken the baby away. But 40 minutes was long enough to count fingers, to learn the exact sound of one specific cry, to notice a small mark below a left ear. "You didn't forget things like that. You tried to and you failed." "Noah," she said, and her voice was not quite right. She could hear it herself, the crack running through the center of it. "What was your mother's name? Your birth mother?" His brow furrowed slightly. Patricia Renaud." Why Patricia Renaud? A name she had not heard in 22 years, since the afternoon she had sat in a lawyer's office in Oakville trying to understand paperwork about a closed adoption. Patricia Renault, a name she had looked for in the years after, finding only a death notice from a year ago, lung cancer and a son listed as her only surviving family, a son named Noah. Diane Okafor, who had been Diane Bissett before she married Richard Hargrove, who had been a 23-year-old with $20 and a borrowed jacket when she walked into Mississauga Trillium and gave birth to a girl she could not keep, sat across from that girl's brother, and understood that the world was either very large or very small, and she had never been sure which. She did not tell him. Not yet. Not in the middle of the Birchwood Club terrace with Gerald hovering near the service entrance, and 4 tables of people pretending not to watch them. She was not a woman who made decisions she hadn't thought through. 22 years of being careful had made her that. But careful and cold were not the same thing, and so she reached across the white tablecloth and placed her hand over Noah's. "I want to help you find her," Diane said. He looked at her hand, then at her face. "You don't know me. I know you walked into a room where you didn't belong and asked for food without lying about why you needed it," she said. "That's more honesty than most people in this building have shown me in years." He was quiet for a long moment. "Why do you care about finding my sister?" Diane looked at him steadily. "Because I think I might know something about her." The afternoon light shifted. At the table beside them, a woman in a blue blazer pretended to check her phone. Gerald reappeared near the entrance, thought better of approaching, and retreated. Noah's eyes changed. They went through stages, confusion first, then something more alert, then something very still and careful. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I need to make some calls," Diane said. "And I need to ask you some questions. And I think that when we're done there's something I have to tell you that I should have been looking for a way to say for a very long time." He stared at her. "Who are you?" She took a breath. "I'm someone who made a decision when I was very young that I have never stopped thinking about," she said. "And I think, I'm not certain yet, but I think, that you just sat down at my table for a reason neither of us is going to fully understand until we know more." The streetcar outside rattled past again. Somewhere in the kitchen, someone dropped something metal and it rang out clean and sharp. Noah didn't pull his hand away. She spent the next 3 days making calls. Her attorney first. A woman named Daria who had handled every delicate thing the Hargrove family had needed, handled for 12 years and who did not ask unnecessary questions. Then a private investigator who had helped her look once before, 5 years ago when she had quietly tried to find her daughter and hit the same sealed walls as always. Then a contact Daria had at the Ministry of Children and Family Services, a retired administrator who owed Daria a favor and knew how to ask for things without leaving paperwork. She set Noah up in one of the Hargrove guest properties on Rosedale Valley Road. He protested, predictably. She told him it was empty, which was true, and that she'd feel better knowing he wasn't sleeping in a doorway, while she needed to ask him questions, which was also true. He was cautious with her for the first 2 days, polite but watchful. He ate the food she sent over, answered her questions carefully and sat in the armchair by the window with his hands wrapped around a coffee mug like he still wasn't sure the warmth was real. She understood that. She had felt that way once, sitting in the offices of people with money who wanted something from her not knowing yet what it would cost. On the 3rd evening Daria called. Diane was alone in her study when she answered. She had the lights low and the window open and the sound of Rosedale in late September coming through. Leaves moving, a dog somewhere, the particular quiet that money bought in this city. "I have what you need," Daria said. "You want it now or in person tomorrow?" "Now," Diane said. Daria read the document slowly. The adoption records from Mississauga Trillium, the transfer records from the Children's Aid Society of Peel, the placement record for a girl named in the file, Infant Bissett, later renamed Meredith Joanna Callahan, placed with a family in Guelph in early February 20 years ago, and in the supplementary file, the one Daria's contact had pulled from the closed system with the favor and some paperwork signed in triplicate, a note attached to Meredith Callahan's record from her SEAS worker, dated 4 months after placement. Sibling located, Noah Renault, age 11, placed separately with family in Hamilton. Files cross-referenced per regional protocol. Sibling contact deferred pending assessment. Assessment not completed due to worker reassignment. Note closed. Sibling contact deferred. Assessment completed. Note closed. 2 children who had been 5 minutes apart in the system's records and 20 years apart in their lives, because someone had been reassigned and the note had been closed. Diane sat in her study for a while after she hung up. She thought about the note. About how much weight those 3 words, assessment not completed, could carry without knowing it. How they could sit in a file for 20 years, meaning nothing to anyone who passed them, while meaning everything to 2 people who would never know they existed. She thought about Noah sitting in the armchair on Rosedale Valley Road, hands wrapped around his mug. She thought about a girl named Meredith Callahan in Guelph, 20 years old now, or near enough. A girl who had grown up knowing she had been placed for adoption, knowing she had a brother named Noah that the system had separated her from, knowing that somewhere there had been a woman who gave birth to her and then walked away. Or believing she had walked away. Diane picked up her phone. She needed to find Meredith before she could tell Noah anything. She needed to be sure. She needed the DNA confirmation she had already asked Daria to arrange, through the investigator, through a clinic in Mississauga, that did this work quietly and quickly for people who needed it done that way. And she needed to figure out how to tell a 20-year-old woman that the mother she had perhaps imagined, walking away, was sitting in a house in Rosedale, with too many rooms and 22 years of carrying something that had never gotten lighter. Meredith Callahan was not hard to find. She was a second-year nursing student at the University of Guelph. She had an Instagram account with the privacy settings halfway. Public enough to be found, private enough to feel protected. She had a photo from last spring standing in front of a hospital building in a blue volunteer vest, squinting into the sun, smiling into someone who had chosen this life deliberately and was glad of it. She had a birthmark below her left ear. The investigator sent over the photo and Diane looked at it for a long time. She looked at the jawline and the dark eyes and the particular way the woman was holding her shoulders. Square, self-sufficient, ready for whatever came next. She looked like someone who had learned to stand up straight in rooms where she wasn't sure she belonged. Diane knew that posture. She had spent years perfecting it herself. The DNA test took 4 days. The investigator was efficient, the clinic was discreet, and Meredith, when approached by a woman presenting herself as a genealogy researcher with a possible family connection, had agreed to a cheek swab with the kind of cautious curiosity of someone who had always known there were questions she didn't have answers to. The result came back on a Tuesday morning. Diane read it twice. Biological match confirmed. Mother and child. She sat with it for an hour. Then she picked up the phone and called Noah. "I need you to come over," she said, "and I need you to bring whatever patience you have, because what I have to tell you is going to take some time." He arrived in 20 minutes, still wearing the jacket she'd had sent over from a shop on Yonge Street. He'd accepted it without comment, which she'd taken as a measure of how much the cold had gotten into him. She made tea. They sat at the kitchen table, not the formal dining room, not the study. The kitchen, with its ordinary light and its view of the back garden, where the last of the summer tomatoes were finally giving up. She told him everything. Not in the order she had rehearsed it, because as soon as she started talking the rehearsed version fell apart and what came out instead was the truth in the shape it had actually lived in her, which was not orderly at all. She told him about being 23 and working 2 jobs, and living in a basement apartment in Mississauga, with a broken radiator, and a landlord who knocked twice before coming in anyway. She told him about discovering she was pregnant and knowing with a clarity that felt like ice water that she could not do it alone. She told him about the adoption agency and the social workers and the careful, rehearsed voices that told her she was doing the brave thing, the right thing, the loving thing. She told him how she had held her daughter for 40 minutes and memorized a birthmark below a left ear. She told him about the years after, about meeting Richard Hargrove at a conference in Ottawa when she was 28. Not because she was looking for a man with money, but because he had made her laugh at a keynote that wasn't funny and that had seemed at the time like a miracle. About marrying into a family that had its own architecture of secrets and expectations. About the child she never had with Richard, which was one grief stacked on top of another, and the way she had learned to live inside that particular configuration of loss. She told him about the 5 years ago attempt to find her daughter, the sealed records, the walls, and she told him about sitting at a terrace table at Birchwood Club on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, when a young man came in from the street and sat down across from her, and said his sister's name was Lily, and she had a birthmark shaped like a comma below her left ear. Noah sat very still through all of it. When she finished, the tea had gone cold. The garden outside had darkened while they talked, the last light pulling back behind the neighbor's fence. He said nothing for a long moment. Then he said, "She's 20 years old? About yes, and she's in Guelph, she's studying nursing." Something moved through his face. Grief and something else, something that didn't quite have a name. "She's okay? She looks okay," Diane said carefully. "She looks like someone who has been okay by working hard at it." He pressed his hands flat on the table. His jaw was tight. "I looked for her," he said. "For years I kept hitting these walls and I thought." He stopped. "I thought she was just gone. I thought the system had just swallowed her and I was never going to find her." "I know," Diane said. "You could have found her earlier," he said. "If you'd had the resources earlier." It wasn't an accusation. But it wasn't nothing either. "Yes, that's true." He looked at her. "And you gave her up, yes, but you've been looking, yes." He was quiet for a long time. Outside a neighbor's motion light came on and lit up the garden briefly and then went out again. "Does she know?" he asked. Does she know any of this?" "Not yet," Diane said. "I wanted to tell you first, she's your sister." Something in his face shifted at that. Just slightly. The tight thing loosened a fraction. "I want to be there," he said. "When she finds out, I don't want her to hear this alone." "I was hoping you'd say that." She called Daria first thing the next morning. Daria called the investigator. The investigator reached out to Meredith Callahan through the same genealogy channel. now with more specific information, and asked if Meredith would be willing to meet. Meredith called back within an hour. She had one question before she would agree to anything. Is my brother going to be there? Diane and Noah drove to Guelph on a Saturday morning. Noah was quiet in the car, the way people are when they are rehearsing things they will not actually say. Diane drove. She was better at doing things with her hands when the rest of her was otherwise occupied. They met in a coffee shop near the university neutral ground, small table by the window. Outside, students moved past on Stone Road with their backpacks and their Saturday faces. Meredith was already there when they arrived. She was 20 years old and she looked like her brother around the eyes. And she looked like Diane around the jaw. And she looked most of all like herself. A specific, particular, complete person who had been building her own life in a city 45 minutes away, while the people who were connected to her moved through their own griefs and searches and carefully maintained not knowing. She stood when they came in. She and Noah looked at each other for a long moment. Then she said, "You got taller," and he laughed, which was the wrong sound for the occasion and exactly the right sound at the same time. They held each other for a long time. Diane stood back and gave them that. When they finally separated, Meredith's eyes were wet but her chin was level. She looked at Diane with a directness that reminded Diane of looking in a mirror in the years before she had learned to soften things. "You're her," Meredith said. "Yes," Diane said. Meredith nodded slowly. She didn't rush toward anything. She didn't pull away. She just stood there looking at Diane the way you look at a thing you have thought about for a long time, and that turns out to be different from the version in your head and still somehow real. "You looked for me," Meredith said. "The woman who called, the genealogy thing, that was you." "I've been looking for 5 years," Diane said. "With the resources I have now. I wish I had started sooner." "Why didn't you?" It was a real question and deserved a real answer. "Because I convinced myself that finding you might do more harm than good," Diane said. "Because I was afraid of what you might feel. Because it was easier to carry it quietly than to risk making your life harder." She paused. "I was wrong about that. I understand if that's difficult to hear." Meredith was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I used to imagine what I would say if I ever met you." "What did you come up with?" "Different things, depending on the day." She looked out the window at the students passing. "Some days I was pretty angry." "That's fair. I'm not sure what day today is yet," Meredith said. She looked back at Diane. "I think I might need a while to figure that out." "Take whatever time you need," Diane said. "I'm not going anywhere." There were people, it would turn out, who had reasons for things to go differently. Richard Hargrove had been gone for 4 years. But Richard's brother, Douglas, who had always had the particular patience of someone waiting for the right moment, had been watching the Hargrove estate arrangements with the attentiveness of a man who had plans. Douglas had known in a general way that Diane had no biological heirs and no Hargrove children. He had known that the charitable foundation Richard had set up was governed partly by Diane and partly by the Hargrove family board, of which Douglas was a member. He had known that in the event of Diane's death, without a will that named specific inheritors, the estate would pass through a set of contingencies that benefited the family collectively. He had not accounted for Meredith Callahan. Word reached Douglas through the kind of channel that didn't leave records. A mutual contact in Guelph, a friend of a board colleague, a phone call over drinks at a club that was not Birchwood, a nursing student, a DNA test, a woman in Rosedale who had apparently found a daughter she'd given up 20 years ago. Douglas made some calls. He found Caleb Morrison. Caleb had known Noah from a construction firm in Oakville 3 years back, the kind of peripheral knowing that became useful when someone wanted a story with specifics in it. He was the type of person who had spent his life understanding which way money moved and positioning himself along the flow. Caleb contacted Noah. Not directly, that would have been too obvious. He contacted him through a mutual acquaintance, framing it as a chance to catch up. They met for coffee on a Tuesday. Noah mentioned, because he was not yet suspicious enough to know he shouldn't, that things had changed significantly for him recently. That he'd found some family. That he was working with someone to sort out the legal side of things. Caleb reported this back to Douglas. Douglas hired a lawyer to draft a letter. The letter arrived at Diane's office on a Thursday. It was addressed to her attorney and copied to the Hargrove Family Foundation board. It claimed that a woman named Meredith Callahan had been identified by a private investigator, working for interests related to the Hargrove estate, and that questions had been raised about the circumstances of the recent DNA testing and the authenticity of the adoption records. It suggested with the careful language that expensive lawyers use to say things without quite saying them, that the sudden appearance of a biological heir at this particular juncture raised concerns about potential fraud. It also included a sworn statement from Caleb Morrison claiming that he had spoken to Noah Renaud recently, that Noah had told him the plan was to establish a legal claim against the Hargrove estate, and that both Noah and Diane were involved in a scheme to manufacture a family connection for financial gain. Diane read the letter at her desk with the door closed. She read it twice, then she called Daria. "How fast can you move?" Diane asked. Define fast, Daria said. Douglas has a lawyer. He has a witness statement. He's going to try to challenge Meredith's legitimacy before she has a chance to establish it. Then we move before he does, Daria said. I'll file the original DNA results with the provincial registry today. I'll request the sealed records be formally opened under the identifying information disclosure process. Meredith is 20, she's entitled to them. And I'll have someone pull the adoption records that predate anyone's interest in the estate. A pause. What about the witness? Caleb Morrison, Diane said. He used to work with Noah. There's a history. Can Noah speak to what was actually said? Yes, good. I'll need him in my office tomorrow. The hearing before the foundation board took place 3 weeks later. Douglas came with his lawyer and his careful expression, and his 20 years of knowing how to move through rooms like this one. Boardroom on the 4th floor of a building on Bay Street. Everything in gray and glass, the kind of neutrality that was its own kind of power. Daria came with the original DNA documentation, the provincial registry confirmation, the unredacted adoption records opened pursuant to Meredith's formal request, a sworn statement from Noah Renaud detailing the actual content of his conversation with Caleb Morrison, and a transcript of a phone call that Caleb had made to Douglas's assistant 11 days before the letter was sent. Pulled from phone records obtained through the investigator, entirely legally, because Douglas's assistant had made the call from a work line on a recorded system. The transcript was thorough. Douglas's lawyer asked for an adjournment. The board chair denied it. It took 4 hours. Douglas did not speak for the last 2 of them. His lawyer spoke quietly to him at one point, and Douglas nodded once and looked at his hands. At the end, the board chair said that the documentation was clear. The process had been followed correctly, and that there were no grounds to challenge Meredith Callahan's biological connection to Diane Okafor Hargrove, or the legitimacy of the disclosure process by which that connection had been confirmed. Douglas left without speaking to Diane. She watched him go. She did not feel the satisfaction she might have expected. She felt tired in the particular way of someone who has finished carrying something very heavy. Not the relief of putting it down but the ache in the arms afterward. Daria touched her elbow on the way out. It's done, she said. I know, Diane said. Outside on Bay Street, the October wind came off the lake with the cold edge it got in the second week of the month. Leaves moved along the sidewalk. People walked with their chins down. Diane stood on the steps of the building and called Noah. It's over, she said. A pause. Then, what happened? Douglas's position didn't hold, Diane said. The documentation was too clean. He knew it before the end. Is he going to try again? He might, she said, but his window was this week with the foundation board. He doesn't have another avenue that doesn't cost him more than it's worth. Another pause. How are you? Noah asked. She looked at the street, at the people moving through their ordinary Thursday afternoon, not knowing that anything had happened in a boardroom 4 floors above them, not knowing that anything had been at stake. I've been better, she said. I've also been worse. Meredith wants to know if you'll come to Guelph this weekend, Noah said. She's doing a thing at the hospital. Volunteer orientation for the new semester. She said you don't have to stay long but... He paused. She said she'd like you to see what she's been building. Diane closed her eyes for a moment, a nursing student in a blue vest standing in front of a hospital building, squinting into the sun. A girl who had built a life out of the materials she had been given, which had not been much, and who wanted to show it to the people who had just, improbably, become her family. Tell her I'll be there, Diane said. She drove to Guelph on Saturday morning. Meredith met her outside the hospital with 2 coffees. And the particular ease of someone who was still figuring out who this person was to her but had decided in the meantime to be kind. They stood for a moment in the October light. You look like you slept, Meredith said. Better than I have in a while, Diane said. Meredith handed her the coffee. They stood side by side looking at the hospital entrance, where volunteers in blue vests were streaming in for the morning orientation. Young people with the particular energy of people who had chosen to be somewhere rather than ending up there. I used to wonder what she was like, Meredith said. My birth mother. I went through a phase when I was 16 where I was pretty sure she was terrible, and then a phase at 18 where I was pretty sure she had some kind of good reason. She paused. I couldn't quite decide which I was hoping for. Diane looked at her. And now, she asked. Meredith was quiet for a moment. Now I think she was 23 and scared and made a decision she's been carrying for 20 years, she said. And I think that's... She stopped. I don't know what that is yet, but I don't think it's simple. It isn't. Meredith looked at her sideways. I'm not ready to call you anything, she said. I just want you to know that. But I'm not. I'm not close to this. To figuring out what it is, neither am I, Diane said. They stood for another moment. A gust came through from the north, carrying the smell of wet leaves and coming cold. Then Meredith tilted her head toward the entrance. You should see the ward I'm working on, she said. Pediatrics, I think I'm going to specialize. Diane followed her in through the doors. The lobby was bright and warm and smelled like every hospital lobby she had ever been in. Disinfectant and something floral underneath. The smell of a place that dealt constantly in urgency and had learned to soften its edges. Noah was already inside, leaning against a wall near the information desk in a new jacket and clean boots, talking to a volunteer coordinator who was showing him something on a clipboard. He looked up when they came in and raised a hand. He looked rested. He looked like a man who had remembered that the future was a place he was allowed to be. Diane thought about the electrical tape on his boots, about the way he had sat on the edge of the chair at Birchwood Club as if he might need to leave quickly. She thought about the words she had said to Gerald that afternoon. Guest. She had not meant it as a weapon. She had just meant that she was choosing with whatever authority she had to make it true. Sometimes that was all it took. Not the grand gesture, not the speech, not the statement on behalf of some principle. Just someone with the power to name a thing deciding to name it right. She had spent 22 years learning to be careful. She did not regret the careful, but she was glad standing in a hospital lobby in Guelph on a Saturday in October, that she had also learned when to stop. Meredith was already moving toward the elevator, calling back over her shoulder about the ward layout and the volunteer schedule. And something about a patient on the third floor who liked card tricks. Diane followed her.